Hey everyone! In this video, I want to talk to you guys about variables and data types. So in math, you have x and y's as variables, but in Python, you can give it any name that you want. The four most popular data types in Python are integers, floats, which are decimals, strings, and booleans. So we're going to go over each one and see what they do. Let's say we have a is equal to 3. This here is an integer, and in order to check this, you can print the type of a. The type function will return whatever type this variable a is. In this case, it is an integer. Here you can see that the class is an integer, and Python writes int for short. An integer can also be negative, so let's say a is equal to -2, and just print out a. A float is basically a number with a decimal. So let's say we have b is equal to -2.5. The way to distinguish between an integer and a float is that it has a period. Now let's see what it prints out as its type. In Python, a decimal will be represented as float. There is a way to convert a float into an integer, and all you have to do is put the number inside the int function. So when you convert a decimal into an integer, you basically just get whatever number before the period. This will output -2, and the type is an int. I think now is also a good time to show you how to swap variables. So let's say you have a is 1 and b is 2. How do we swap it so a becomes 2 and b becomes 1? Well, here's the syntax. A comma b is equal to b comma a. You can see that a now becomes 2 and b becomes 1. The third data type we're going to cover are strings, and you can think of strings as text. So for example, you have a is equal to 1, but this is not an integer. To show you that it is text, you can print the type of a, and it should output a string. So in Python, a string will simply be str, which is short for string. A common bug that I think a lot of beginners might encounter is adding text to an integer or a float. So for example, you have b is equal to 2, and then let's say we take a plus b. It will result in an error saying that you can't add between a string and an integer. So that's because this is text and this is an integer, and they're not compatible with each other. The solution here is simply to remove the quotation marks, so you have integer and integer. And as you can see, it's able to print out 3. Let's try putting some words into a string, like C is equal to John. You can also do single quotes like this, and that would be absolutely fine. But in other languages like Java, it wouldn't like the single quotes for multi-letter strings. However, this is totally okay in Python. Let's try printing out C. Now, let me show you how to print each letter inside the string C. We're going to loop through it, so for each character inside the string C, we're going to print out the character. And this is called a for each loop. So you can see in the command prompt that it prints out each letter one at a time. Another way to loop through each character in the string is to use a for loop. So let's say for I in range from the beginning of the string to the end of the string, and this is the syntax for it. We're going to print each character, so C at index I. Now, we will talk more about for loops in the future, but it's a good introduction for now. And if I run this, you can also see that the result is the same. And at this point, you should know how to convert between an integer to a string. So let's say you have C is equal to 1. Now this here is an integer, and if you want to convert this to text form, you can do str like this. So str is a function that converts any data type into a string. So we print out C and also print out its type. Next up, I'll show you how to concatenate strings. That basically means you add strings together. So let's say you have A is equal to John and B is equal to Doe. Now actually, I'll put a space here and you will see why. So if I print out A plus B, the result should be John Doe. And if you remove the space, it will actually stick together. So it will be John Doe without a space in between. String concatenation can also be done on the same line. So you have John plus Doe, and it will give you John Doe. You have to become familiar with what is called indexes. In this string here, the first index is always 0. So J is at index 0, O is at index 1, H is at index 2, and even the space has an index itself. So the space will have an index of 4, the D will be 5, O is 6, and E will be 7. Now, if you want to access, let's say O, then we print out C at index 1. And this should output an O. It is not possible to change the O to a different letter because strings in Python are immutable, meaning that once they are created, they cannot be changed. So let's say I want to change the O to an A, like this. Now this will not work in Python, as I said before, because strings are immutable. But let's say you want to change the O to an A. Then the way to do it is to use string slicing. We want the J first. So to slice a string, we just cut it apart like bread, right? So we want the beginning of the string up until the index 1, but not including index 1. So this will print out J. Yep, it does. And then we want the rest of the string starting from H. So plus C and beginning at index 2 until the end of the string. Now this will give you J, H, N, Doe without the O in between. But let's say we want an A instead. So we plus an A. And now you can see we have John Doe with the O changed to an A. What if you only want part of a string? So let's say we want from this O to this O. We want this part of the string. A part of a string is called a substring. That's the technical word for it. We will begin at 1 until 7. So the syntax here is starting from 1, which is this O, and up until 7, but not including 7. So 7 is an E, but we're not including the E. And there you go. We have the substring. Let's say we have a sentence. John Doe says Python is easy. Now, if we run this, it will actually give you an error. The error is you have too many double quotes. To fix this issue, all you have to do is put a backslash here so you can escape the double quotes. And if you print it out again, you will be able to see Python is easy. Another way to fix it is to change the beginning and the last quotes into single quotes. When I run it, it's also able to print out John Doe says Python is easy. If you want to check to see that John is inside the sentence, then the syntax for it is John in C. And the answer is yes. So if we run it, you can see that it outputs true, which means yes in Python. Now, if I change this to a Jill, then you know that Jill is not inside the sentence, right? But what if we say Jill not in C? We're asking Python, is Jill not inside the sentence? And the answer should also be yes. So as you can see here, it prints out true. The last data type we're gonna cover today is a boolean. And a boolean is a data type that only has two possible values, so true or false. So let's say D is equal to true. We print out the D, and we also want what type is the variable D. And command prompt says that the value is true, and the type is a boolean, or bool for short. We can also change this to a false, and if we run it again, it would now be false. So that covers the 4 most popular data types in Python, which includes integers, floats or decimals, strings or text, and booleans.